Really good. Really good. You know, sometimes when you're just more worried about delivering your own thing on these things, just so you get past it. And I still find it quite. It's the first one I've done since my A license, so I found it quite nerve-wracking going back on and doing one of the mic'd up sessions again. And DeVos is he was up in a tower filming it and everything. Yeah. For fuck's sake. No, you get to this age, you're just like, I don't want to do any more of them, you know, but I have to do it here for. Well, I didn't have to do it, but the club wanted us all to do the new youth license because it's 13 to 18 appropriate.
Yes.
So we all, or me and the player development manager went on it. It was a good course, really good, but still definitely argumentative with DeVos and Stuart Neely and that. But then when we got on field for his session, he did a centre-backs defensive session. Brilliant. Yeah. One of the best I've seen.
Right, we'll get going, guys. You'll be delighted to hear, Colin, that the older generation have all turned up because you're here today. So Chappie's arrived, Sandy Pollock's arrived. All the guys are getting on in years. You're just appealing to a very different audience. But welcome everybody.
Eric.
Welcome everybody. Excited to get moving on this and to welcome Colin. Many of you know Colin Miller. Colin's an absolute legend in many eyes, and I'm trying to contain his excitement level, him and Kingy, after a certain result in Glasgow last night, as you'll probably see with his the big permigrin that he's got for the hour that we're going to join him today. But we're trying to get past that very quickly so that they don't show their true colours. But welcome and thanks for joining us, and we're just going to jump straight into this. Colin's got many a story to tell, what a journey he's been on, you know, from his early days growing up in Lanarkshire, born and raised in Lanarkshire, the first 9-10 years, emigrated to Canada, certainly going back and forth a bit, you know, through the years. But welcome, Colin. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing fine, Eric. Thanks very much for inviting me onto this, and hopefully you guys enjoy the shite that I'm going to talk here for the next wee while. But no, it's fantastic to be here.
And certainly, Colin, just tell us, you know, what time of hour did you get to the bed last night? Because I know you were up celebrating a wee bit for the boys' result.
Well, it was brilliant, and what was funny is that we live just outside of Vancouver, and beautiful weather here at the moment. And the guy next door to us was cutting his grass. So you know what noise a lawnmower can make when it's going, and he actually stopped cutting the grass once Rangers scored. He went, "What in the hell's happened to the wee man?" And next door, the back door was open. It's such a scream, but well, brilliant. It's a great night for Scottish football last night. So long may it continue. It
certainly was a great night. I think we're all on the same page on that one. But just to get us rolling, Colin, certainly, you know, and you know, the presentation and the insight that you gave me and Kingy and some others to get this, what a journey it's been. Give us a quick snapshot to your early days, Colin. You know, I know you were born and raised just outside of Shotts, was it?
Yeah.
And you know, give us a quick snapshot to your early playing days. You know, playing in that neck of the woods and what your journey entailed. You know, all the way into, you know, getting to your first shot at, you know, at the big leagues.
Yeah, it's I was like most kids, Eric, to be honest with you, most boys at that time in Scotland. My family grew up there, and we emigrated to Vancouver in 1975. So the first 10 years of my life was a coal miner's son, and my mum worked at Hartwood Hospital in Allenton, the little village that we grew up in. It was all about football. It was all about street football. And every Christmas day, everybody had their new strip suit and their new balls, and we'd be down to the square, as we called it, Eric. And I used to think it was the size of Hampden, this area that we played in. And when I first went back for the first time, this place was only about 20 by 20 in this wee area that we used to play football. I used to think it was massive. But everybody turned up with a brand new ball, the Rangers strip or whatever strip they had on. And we say, okay, right, pick the two teams and say, right, we'll use your ball. I was not using my ball, it's brand new. Everybody had got a new ball that was pumped up and nobody wanted to use it. But it was all, my brother and I, Dal, were just football daft, and Dal to this day is still football daft and very knowledgeable about the game. And So there was always, every time there was a break in school, typical lads at the time, it was football, football, football. And the reason that I'm stressing that is that the only organised football that we played was for the school. There was no coaching, there was nothing. In fact, I often tell this story that I didn't have a coach until I came to Canada. And so once we emigrated to Vancouver, obviously the football in North America is a lot more structured. So that for the youngsters. So we, as I say, we emigrated right into the heart of East Vancouver, and there was quite a famous local club there called Grandview Legion. And Grandview Legion have produced some very, very good Canadian international players. Bob Lenarduzzi, Dale Mitchell, Frank Chacha. I know nobody would know the majority of those names, but certainly within the Canadian ranks, people would know Lenarduzzi and Dale Mitchell. Both were national team coaches, went on to that level of football. So this was our first taste of it, and we played on very good teams. So the structure at the time was you played in your local club side, and then there was actually quite a bit of scouting went on through the youth ranks at the time, because what happened, you played for your club team, and then if you were identified as you were getting older, you'd then play on the select district side, and from there you would go from the district side into a provincial side. So these were the sort of the elite levels, and then you would graduate once you finished your provincial thing, and you were drafted out of those groups into a national team, youth levels. So we went through that, Dal and I both went through that process, and probably one of the reasons why we had such a very good head start on your average Canadian guy was they were just playing football once or twice a week at their training sessions, and not necessarily playing what we did, playing the street football. So everything progressed, and I got identified into the next level, and then into the next level, and a few years progressed. And then, of course, high school football became quite prevalent at the time in Vancouver, and the North American Soccer League, which was massive at that time, they were sending local scouts to go and watch as many of the players as you possibly could. And you were starting to get scouted. So you went through, and then a lot of these professional clubs like the New York Cosmos, Tampa Bay Rowdies, Toronto Blizzard, Vancouver Whitecaps, so on and so forth. They were big clubs in North America at the time. They would come and watch these provincial championships. So I got identified, and I got invited to go into Toronto. So here I am, a 16-year-old lad, maybe 17 at the time, and I've got to go to Toronto. Now, for those who don't know, Toronto was 3 times the size of Vancouver, and I've been living in my mum and dad's house all my life. I could hardly find the kitchen, never mind if I can find where training was. So I had to go there and spend a week in training. Now, the manager of the club at the time was a gentleman by the name of Bob Houghton, and Bob was actually the manager of Malmo that lost to Nottingham Forest many moons ago in one of the European Cup finals. So he was a fabulous mentor for me, very, very patient with the young Canadian guys coming through. Anyways, I did well. I did well during that week. And then I'm sitting in high school, and I knew the North American Soccer League draft was happening. And I actually found out that I'd been drafted by Toronto through the tannoy, through the school, because the high school principal announced it to the full school that I had just been graduated, that I had just been drafted by the Blizzard. So it was fantastic. It was such a thrill, because not every player, as we know, when they put so much into the game, manages to get that little break, get that identified or whatever. So here it was a fabulous opportunity for me. So during that time, we became Canadian citizens as a family. So my mum and dad, and I've got an older brother and 2 younger sisters. So we became Canadians, and it was a huge thrill, as you can imagine, because this is the country I call home now, although I always speak about the country back home as well, very passionately. I believe we all do. But this country has been so good to the Miller family, and given us opportunities. There's not a chance in hell I would ever have played for Scotland at the national team level, or maybe even become a professional football player, the opportunities that I was given in Canada were phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. But I worked hard enough to get there. And once I got the chance to play for the national team at the youth team levels, they appointed me as the captain. I was fortunate enough to have that role through a lot of the clubs that I played for, and certainly at the national team level. But so I must have had those leadership qualities at a very early age, and that, I think, definitely inspired me to get involved in the coaching side of things. But through the playing side of things, at the early ages, I had some very, very good role models in terms of coaching, and some very interesting, motivating things that I don't think you might get away with nowadays. For instance, one of my very best friends in the game is a gentleman, a Geordie lad called Alan Errington. And Alan once told me when I was a bit younger, he said, "Right, wee man," he says, "you're too short, too slow and too fat." And it's, to be fair, it's still like an accurate assessment. Not a lot has changed since then. But he said that to me because he knew he'd get a rise out of me, and he knew that he would get, because he saw something in me. You know, I can't imagine saying to a young boy or a young girl here that you're too short, you're too slow, or you're too fat nowadays, because you'd be hung, drawn and quartered. But he did it to motivate me, and he was one of the provincial coaches, and then he became Bob Lenarduzzi's assistant coach with the Vancouver 86ers and then the national team. So Alan obviously had a vision for players, and he helped produce a lot of talented players in British Columbia. So it was very good. My dad was a real good role model in a lot of ways, but also other ways where I look back and I go, geez, I wish we hadn't done that. I can remember the two of us punching the lights out of a referee one day. It was a big English guy that my dad was typical guy on the sideline shouting and screaming, that wasn't a foul, that wasn't it. So the two of them started arguing. There was a pushing match, and then next thing you know, a fight breaks out. And my dad was just that he wasn't always fighting by any stretch. I don't want to paint it was a nutcase, but he was really into his football. He loved these Rangers. We grew up as a real Rangers family. Other than my grandfather, my dad's side was a big Motherwell supporter. I can remember always trying to get my papa to jump ship and come out of the Rangers side, but he wasn't having it. He was always a Motherwell supporter. But my dad was season ticket. We took Dal and I to Ibrox. My first game, I think, was maybe 9 years of age, watching Falkirk at Ibrox. And I just remember coming into Ibrox and seeing how green the pitch was and the colours on the pitch. It'll never leave me, that memory. If I get goosebumps now thinking about it, but it's, we were just dying the goal. So that was a passion. That was a real dream for me to grow up, Eric. So that was always an incentive in the back of my mind. Just to give you a wee background on what it was like growing up in Canada, playing a lot of football. I mean, a lot of football. I'm talking maybe 3 games a week, like 3 real competitive games a week, plus training. My high school teachers were fantastic to me because they knew that I had an opportunity at the next level of football. So my English teacher and my math teachers, they would give me an extra few days to try and get the programs in and the projects in and get them done. So everybody worked with me to try and help me go through the time that I was in. So I was very grateful. A lot of people contributed to helping me get on to the next level. And I genuinely believe as a young player that without those sort of role models, positive role models around about you, you could struggle. You could feel as if you're on an island. And I never felt that way. I always had people encouraging me and pushing me on because they saw the talent. There's no point in wasting time on something that's you're never going to get to that level. But here at that particular time, as a young Scots guy coming through and then becoming a Canadian, there was an opportunity there for me that I took with both hands for sure.
And I think just to jump on for there, Colin, is 2 things quickly. I reached out to your brother Dal, who I know well, and only Dal could say this in Dal's way. I said, give me an insight to your relationship with Colin as you were growing up, and his words were, he says, telling me he was shite, I was the best player in the house.
He was
I
actually.
believe, but he, you know, by all accounts, is Dal was a good player, and you had a very competitive, you know, brothers kind of going at it as well.
Yeah, that's right. He was the one. He was a centre forward, and I was a defender. And you can blow things out of proportion, but I was always very, very surprised, Eric, that Dal didn't get to the professional level, because locally he was the top scorer in all the levels. He played at the provincial level, top scorer, but he was, I mean, I'm only 5'7", so he was like a garden gnome. He's 5'5", he is, you know, so he, I think at that time, maybe in North America, the teams were looking for that type of player. They were looking for someone a wee bit bigger, or certainly more aggressive. And Dal was more, he was more a lover than a fighter, that's for sure.
Yeah, he certainly is. Take us, fast forward us a little bit, Colin, obviously, you know, just describing your early impressions of Rangers and Ibrox and what that impact had on you and your family. Fast forward us a wee bit to, you know, signing for Rangers and signing for, you know, none other than Jock Wallace in the early days. Or, you know, you and I have talked a lot about the early days stories, and, you know, I particularly remember an Old Firm reserve game that you told me about. But give us a little insight to, you know, how you ended up at Ibrox and what those early days were like.
Well, I'll tell you how I got to there, Eric, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Before that story. And when I signed with the Blizzard, Bob Houghton said, I want to send you back for a pre-season, if you like. He wanted me to send me back to Scotland. He says, where is your local team? Where was the team closest to you? I said, well, Motherwell would have been the closest team to where I lived. And he said, well, who's the manager there? And I said, it's Jock Wallace. He says, oh, I know Jock Wallace very well from his days in Malmo and so on and so forth. So they'd come into contact a few times. He says, I'll give him a call and see if I can get you back for pre-season. So lo and behold, it worked out. So I fly into Scotland. And again, I'm just a kid. I'm 17-year-old. I've had 7 years in Canada, very wet behind the ears compared to the average 17-year-old lad in Scotland. So I arrived, you can imagine the flight. That was a monster flight, flying to Glasgow, go to my grand's place. She makes me a great big fry up. I'm training that morning. It was a Tuesday morning, never forget. And there's Big Jock and Frank Connor, two of the most vocal characters in Scottish football. Phenomenal men, absolutely phenomenal men. So I walk in there and I'm freaking terrified. It's like going to a new school and you've got all these players walking about. It's like an army of ants all over the place at Fir Park. So they get me my gear, and there's a big lad, Edvilson, that I think played with Celtic. Yeah, big Shuggy. So we get piled into this minivan, or a couple of minivans, and we go to this place in Motherwell, and it's two red ash pitches. So look, I didn't know a thing about it, but Tuesday was traditionally a running day. So here I am, I've had a couple of slices of haggis, a couple of slices of black pudding, a couple of square sausages, and a can of iron brew. Just arrived in Scotland, I thought it was brilliant. So I turned up, go to training, and then we started to do a few laps there, and a wee bit faster, and all of a sudden I can feel the haggis and the black pudding swirling about. And I said, excuse me, I have to exit stage left. So I get down the bottom of this hill, throw up all my breakfast, come back up, and Big Shuggy, of all people, comes across and taps me on the back. He says, are you okay, wee man? I says, I feel better now. He says, you better join in. So I joined in again. I finished the whole training session. And Big Jock pulls me aside afterwards. He said, see, if you had stopped, you were away. I wouldn't have let you train anymore. But he meant it in a good way, because Big Jock, God rest him, had a phenomenal heart, absolutely phenomenal. So anyways, I was there for about 3.5 weeks, Eric, and I did very well. Gary McAllister was playing for Motherwell at the time, and we trained. I played in a number of reserve games and did quite well. So I was leaving on the Thursday. So Big Jock pulls me in on the Wednesday morning. He says, right, what about all this shite, you're going back to Canada? What is all this all about? I says, I've got a 3-year contract with a Blizzard gaffer, and, it's back home type of thing. He said, well, listen. And he asked me this question, I'll never forget it. He says, listen, how do you feel about Celtic, son? And I says, I'm like a bull when he sees red, Gaffer. He says, right. He says, see that shite that you've signed in Toronto? He says, rip that up. And he says, and you're starting at left back on Saturday against Celtic here at Fir Park. Will you do that? I says, I'd love to do it, but I can't do it. I'm under contract and so on. But that's what he said. He says, how do you feel about Celtic, son? And I says, like a bull when he sees red. And that's how it started. So anyways, I kept in touch with Big Jock during the time. We go for pre-season to Orlando, Florida, and I send him a couple of postcards of the beach. I says, this just looks like downtown Motherwell and all that sort of stuff. Brilliant it was. So I kept in touch. And next thing you know, he gets the Rangers job. And the Toronto Blizzard played Rangers in Hamilton, Ontario. And I believe the biggest Rangers supporters club is in Toronto, in the world. And there must have been about 17,000 fans in Hamilton Stadium. And I can assure you, not many of them were Toronto Blizzard fans. It was absolutely fantastic. It was a great atmosphere. So we played that night, and I played right back. Jimmy Nicholl played in front of me, wide right. And here I am playing against Davy Cooper. So my arse is going like this for the entire game because I knew what Coop was capable of. And I played well, but I saw Big Jock before the game. And he, as usual, hit me in the ribs here before the game. He says, don't leave this stadium before I speak to you. I says, great. So my old man, he'd flown from Vancouver into Toronto. He's got his Rangers top on, his tam and his scarf. The only thing missing was his bits and his shin pads. And so he's there to watch the game. So we beat Rangers 2-0 that night. And McCoy still speaks about the goal that was scored against Rangers that night because it was that good. It was a guy called in the NASL called Ace Insolenkwe, and he was a South African player, an absolutely phenomenal player. Anyways, as I said, before the game, Big Jock says, don't leave here. So we're having our team talk after the game against Rangers. So Bob Houghton's chatting away. Next thing you know, the door gets banged open and Bob Houghton stops speaking, and this Big Jock walked in and says, hey, you, don't leave. Make sure I'll see you when you come out. So I said, right, okay. So I have my arse is making buttons again. So we get tidied up. I go out, and he says, listen, he says, this league is going to fold. And he said, and I want you to come back to Rangers. And he said, I said, so you can imagine my eyes lit up and all that. So that's really how it happened. And he says, I'll phone you. As soon as this league folds, I'll phone you. And he did. He woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, Big Jock was like through the phone. You could imagine what it was like trying to understand what he was saying at times. You can imagine what it's like you just woke up. So I hung up and I rolled it, and the wife says, who was that? I said, it was Jock Wallace. He wants me to sign for Rangers. I think, I'm not sure. So, and so that's how it all started, Eric. And then come back to Rangers, and John Haggart picked my wife and I up at the airport in a wee mini metro where it was. And we've got all these bags. You can imagine, young couple, we think we're immigrating, and we've got all these bags. So it was all, there were bags hanging out the windows. There was all sorts of things. The missus sees in the back seat. So the first day we got into Ibrox, and Davy Cooper, God rest him, really took me under his wing when I was there, because I'd met him in Toronto and we went out with my dad and the Rangers players that night. And Coop was great. And he says, right, wee man, look at the boots you're wearing. He says, we need to go and get you a new pair of boots. I says, great. So I'll take you. We're going to Greaves in Glasgow. So we're going to Greaves in Glasgow. Of course, everybody knows Coop. And he says, right, get these, a pair of World Cups and a pair of Copas when we come back. So I paid for the boots, and I handed in the receipt the next morning to John Haggart. And John was fantastic. He was absolutely brilliant. He was. Or it might have been Alec Totten, I can't remember. So I'm not thinking anything of it, but I'm worried. I'm thinking, here I am, I just got these new boots. What's the gaffer going to say? Anyways, I go in, I'm getting ready and stuff, and I think it was Alec Totten that came down the stairs. He says, Colin, he says, gaffer wants you. So I think, oh, geez. So I got up the marble staircase, and there's a door in front of me. You tap the door, makes you wait a wee bit. Tap the door again. Aye, come in. So then the next door, in you come. So I says, hi, gaffer, you wanted to see me? He says, aye. Excuse my language. He says, what the fuck is this? He shows me the receipt. He says, what the fuck is this? He says, get them back, take them back. He says, if you get them, all the bastards down the stairs and want to get them. So I had to take the boots back and get a different pair of football bits. Fantastic. And then, of course, we had all the gear. We would get our gear washed and put in our training places every Monday morning. And there was a big hot water pipes that went through the home dressing room. In fact, went all the way through the main stand. And we would take our gear off, put it on a clothes hanger type thing with a basket, put our boots in the basket area, socks, slips, shorts, and that didn't matter how muddy it was, and then put it in the dryer, these huge big cupboards, shut the door, and it would be dry. The next day you come out and wore the same gear. And I'm thinking, that doesn't seem very hygienic or anything like that. You're coming from Canada. You know, I think, look at it. So, no, by maybe Wednesday it might have got washed if it was too dirty, but there was sometimes you didn't get washed a week. When Soonest came in, that was the first thing he changed, was all the training gear. So it was all actually old Rangers strips that we trained in. It wasn't training gear, it was actually old Rangers strips. Absolutely amazing. But, you know, I played 7 first team games for Rangers, won the reserve league with Rangers, played with some fantastic players, even in that Rangers team, the reserves. Billy Davies, for me, was probably man of the match. Most, I'd say 80% of the games. And the problem with Billy was he signed month-to-month contract. He wasn't committing himself to a longer term deal. And Big Jock said he would never sign, he'd never play a player that was just signing month-to-month contracts. And it was a shame. But what an experience. But the problem for me, the start that I had at Rangers, I did all the pre-season. And I was playing left back in the first game up in the Highlands in the pre-season tour. So I was lying sleeping in the afternoon and bang on the door, and here it was Big Jock. He says, "Wee man," he says, "you can't play tonight." I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "No," he says, "something called international clearance that has to come through," and it actually took 7 weeks for that international clearance to come through, which of course set me back because Ali Dawson and Stuart Monroe were terrific for Rangers, and I never really got a chance. I was hoping they would always get injured every week, or that you know, as you have to think as a footballer, to try and get a game. But I played league games. I played in Scottish Cup for Rangers against Hearts, and then I was actually the last Rangers captain. It's a trivia question. I was actually the last Rangers captain for under Jock Wallace. I was leaving the following week to join up the Canadian national team to go to Mexico '86. In the World Cup. So Big Jock, Rangers were playing Tottenham Hotspur at Ibrox, and he said, "Right, wee man, you take the team out this week." So we lost 2-0 to Spurs that day, but I must have made a hell of an impression because Big Jock got sacked on the Monday, and Soonest came in the next day. But what an experience that was, what a transition it was at Rangers at the time. The impact, I mean, Soonest for me was my favourite player of all time, even before he was the Rangers manager. I just admired him so much. I thought he was a terrific player, ran the show for Liverpool, Sampdoria as well, and just an absolute legend he was. And he came in, I'll never forget it, the chairman and all the Ibrox staff came into the home dressing room, we were all sitting there. And anybody that's been on the call, that's been involved when a manager has been sacked, it's kind of like a death in some ways, Eric, where you don't, what's going to happen next? What do you say? Everybody's quiet. It's all sort of mumbling underneath. So we had heard rumours, of course, that the gaffer was going to take over. Anyway, here he comes in. Now he's like a male model. He's all suntanned. He's got an Italian designer suit on, and we're sitting like pints of milk. And he's chatting away. He says, "Listen, gentlemen," he says, "I've always been a Rangers supporter. I'll always be a Rangers supporter." He says, "We're gonna wake up this big giant. We're gonna wake this big giant up. In fact, we're gonna wake up British football." And he said, "If I can tell you now, the majority of you won't make it, won't be here." And he said, "Because we're going to change. We're going to move the goalposts here." And what's that sort of effect? Very strong words. There was no grey areas when he left. He said, "I'm going to stamp our authority on this," and he certainly did. Walter Smith was a massive influence at Rangers as when he was here on one of these calls. The impact that Walter had off the park as well as on the park was tremendous, because young guys going to speak to him, and he was always he's typical Walter. He opened his door for anybody, and he had a terrific impact as well. But it was about standards, and I remember just very quick this story here, where I'd been I was always training with the first team, and Big Terry Butcher had been not feeling well all during the week, so I'd been home. I was playing the reserves the next day, and Walter Smith phoned me on a Friday, and the lads all stayed at the Grosvenor Hotel on a Friday night, and he says, wee man, he says, the gaffer wants to see you. Come in, you have dinner with the players and all that. So I'm thinking, I've got a chance, Big Butcher's no well, brilliant. So I come in and I sit down with the lads eating my dinner, and I'm waiting. Of course, the gaffer's there with Walter and Phil Boersma, the therapist, and he said, right, wee man, now you come. Walter comes to get me, sits me down. He says, right, he says, gaffer, as soon as says to me, he said, if I have to wait on the young players coming through, I'm out of a job. He says, you're one of the players that I can move to bring in somebody in a sort of swap type deal. So he says, how would you feel about going to Doncaster? And I went, where the fuck's Doncaster? So I said to him, I says, where's Doncaster? I said, I'd be a clue, I was from Vancouver. And he said, so he explained it to me, and I realised at that time that I wasn't at the Rangers level. I wasn't going to be part of that plan, unfortunately. So I wanted to play. And the moving to Doncaster was really the making of me in terms of becoming a real solid professional football player. And it was also the start of my coaching era, and I was about 21, nearly 22 at that time, Eric.
I think, see, jump in from there, and certainly, as you say, Souness revolutionised, I think, Scottish football at that time. It was a turning point for everybody. Is when you look at your career, Colin, and playing career, and certainly I want to get Kingy into the coaching pieces. When you reflect back and, what a playing career you had and played at some fantastic and big clubs, where was your fondest period as a player, Colin, as you look? Obviously, you were a Rangers fan, but you look at the bigger clubs that you went on to as well. As a player, where did you feel that you hit your groove, and that you found that was your most successful period? Well,
the happiest I was as a player, Eric, was actually at Hamilton. I played over 200 games for the club, captain for many years, and won 2 B&Q Cup finals as well. But we never made a dime. The wages were late. There was all sorts of things happening. You just couldn't script it any worse. And Chappie's laughing away. I can see him, but it was just, and it never changed. Even as a manager, it never changed your wages being late and things like that. But I played with some terrific guys. I mean, George McCluskey, Jerry McCabe, the list could go. Jim Weir, Alan Ferguson, Paul McDonald, all of these guys. And I tell you, Colin Big Bomber Harris as well. The quality of the teams that we had, and we just, every year, we just seemed to miss out in promotion. We were always competitive, and the lads, the stories that I could tell here, I'll not go into a lot of them, but the characters, the managers that I played for as well, like John Lambie, for instance. I mean, if there is a bigger character, that's been in Scottish football, he just told you exactly what he thought. It didn't matter if I'm going to hurt your feelings. He didn't give a toss about that. It was just, you were getting it regardless. But he was also very fair and incredibly honest. And I can remember a story, and Chappie will laugh about this, with Frank Ness, the physio for the Ackies at the time. And Frank was on the dole, and we were in the Premier League at the time. And Nessie was terrified because if the photographers had got a photo of him treating anybody, or he was on the telly, he used to run onto the park facing away for the injury, so he wouldn't see who it was. So this one day, the pitch is frozen solid, and the red ash with lifting tyres or pulling tyres around the running track. And Frank Ness, the physio, he'd had a few happy meals in his days, Eric. Maybe it wasn't as svelte as the physios are nowadays. And he had this T-shirt made up, the fastest physio in Scotland. So Nessie says to him, the gaffer says to him, Lambie says to him, you're not that fast. I says, I bet I'm faster than you. So we had the hurdles up behind the back of the goals at the bottom of the hill at the park. And he says, right, we'll have a race. So the players are there fucking egging them on, as you can imagine. So these hurdles, and they lasted 3 of the hurdles. Lambie's pulled his hamstring and Nessie's done his groin. We had to get a physio to treat the physio and the manager. But that was what he was up for. You just didn't know from one day to the next what we were going to do. But what a man. He was jumping back and forth from Partick Thistle to the Ackies, back and forth, back and forth. It was incredible. Real character. Jim Dempsey as well. Jim gave me my first chance at being a sort of first team coach type of thing. And I was the captain of the side as well. Then there was Billy McLaren, who was a real character as well. Hard as nails. Brought in 3-5-2 at a very early age. There wasn't a lot of teams that played 3-5-2, and Billy changed that, and he worked so well with Willie McLean, who was fantastic. Willie was such a mentor, and I see Chappie nodding there, that Craig Brown had said that Willie McLean was the most knowledgeable football person he had ever met. And I can genuinely believe that, because Willie would just sit, and Willie gave me the chance, and Billy gave me the chance to be the reserve team coach at Hamilton, still at a very early age. And so I would do the team talk, blah, 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 get everything all ready, and then the players would go out, and Willie would say, okay, that was okay, or that was shite, or he'd go, and half time, all these types of things. So Willie then come in after the game and he'd say one thing, so the coaches on the line will appreciate this, that he would say, yeah, your remarks are very good, but very general, and you're no nailing anybody, either in a positive or a negative way. He said, as soon as you start to go for somebody in one way or another, the rest of the group will start to listen. So you could say, by the way, Eric, that was blah, 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 and you name him and you start to make points to him, the rest of the group start to focus on them. But if it's always, well done, guys, yeah, great performance in the first half, yeah, everything's happy, shiny faces, butterflies everywhere, then everybody's switched off, they're looking for the oranges at half time type of thing. So when you start to be more specific to players, they start to listen a wee bit more. So there was just wee snippets now and again that Willie would hit you with that were fantastic, and he was a tremendous influence for me, as was Craig, of course. But the time at Hamilton was brilliant, because you just didn't know. There was Kenny Ward, so many characters in that dressing room every day. You didn't know what was going on. Just another wee story, we used to play the yellow jersey, and so the yellow jersey was the worst player of the morning. But I started it, and I said, okay, but we'll have a silent vote. So I'd go round to start it, and I'd mark off, all right, Kingy, yeah, who's your vote? Eric, okay, yeah, great. So all of a sudden, there'd be mornings where I go, I vote for you, wee man, you were shite. Oh, I didn't like that. So I'd say, right, yeah, Chappie, who you vote? Yeah, you were shite this morning, wee man. Yeah, you were shite. I said, by the way, Kingy's fucking voting for you. What? Oh, I vote Kingy then. So before you knew it, I never had a vote. And I had a fucking disastrous training session. Next thing you know, Kingy's got 12, Eric's got 11. You've not even got a vote, wee man. How do you get that? I says, by the way, and then Kingy and Eric might start arguing, why were you voting for me? I wasn't voting for you. That wee bastard there just tell me you were voting for me. So before you knew it, and whoever got the yellow jersey had to bring in 3 packets of chocolate biscuits and make everybody their tea in the morning with a penny on them. It was brilliant. And the training became so competitive that you just didn't want to have it. And everybody was behind there, who are you voting for this morning? It actually transitioned the training. So then, never mind all these new modern methods. Get the chocolate biscuits out and make some tea.
But see, when you touch on that, Colin, like the big thing that jumps out to me is, we're all up in the current trends and the big names and all that stuff. But you look at all the big names, all the big personalities, all the characters, all the, that you spent your formative years with, that probably you look back and reflect, that was where your foundation was built.
Yeah.
And every one of those, the Jerry Collins, that you could keep going, that's all big characters that probably, gave you the best foundation. What I do want to do, because I know we could sit here for the next 3 hours on the plane journey, I want to flip over to Kingy just so that he can dig in to the coaching side, because certainly we wanted to jump onto that quickly. So I'm going to flip over to Kingy just now.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
You covered the first mentor question there, Colin. That I was going to ask, certainly on the McLean family, having had dealings with them. I think you had the same. You had
yeah.
Someone coming in there. Someone needs to mute themselves up. Yeah, I think you had the same, McLean. I dealt with Jim and Tommy in the media world, who once fell out so badly over a reserve game that they gave each other Christmas presents in a motorway lay-by. So, Willie McLean, could you go into a little bit more detail about Willie McLean and how much he helped you at Accies? Because he's probably the one that put you on your coaching pathway. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he was. I mean, I took my first coaching licence when I was 22, Kingy, down at Doncaster, and it was called the English Prelim licence, and it was done over a series of weekends, particularly on Sundays. It was a sort of an 8-hour shift. So that was when I really got my first licence, if you like. Now, when I came up to Scotland, started playing, I always enjoyed coaching. I always wanted to be in the coaching, and Willie was terrific. He loved a cup of tea and just a blether. And even when he was at Motherwell, I think maybe Chappie was with him at Motherwell at the time, I used to go and see him. I'd just sit and talk about football with him and what would you do here and what would you do that? I'm working with the reserves tonight. So he was so wide open to anything, but he was always honest. His honesty was refreshing. It's a dying trait at times with some people in the game, unfortunately, but he wanted to help you. He saw potential in you, but he also helped me get to the next level of football, because he said that Tommy had been interested and tried to sign me 3 or 4 times when he was the manager at Motherwell, and he says, just keep playing because you never know where our time will end up. And of course, Tommy McLean went to Hearts at the time, and Tommy signed me at Hearts when I was there. And another fantastic football brain, Tommy McLean, absolutely fantastic. Possibly not the easiest man to get along with some people. I could see that, Kingy, but his knowledge of the game and some of the sessions he used to run were phenomenal. Willie was, to me, Chappie can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a simplicity to what Willie did. There was a real simplicity. He didn't overly complicate things. He kept the picture as clear as it could be for the players, and the way he explained it. And he always, if you had one way of doing things, he always had another one in the back pocket if that one didn't work out. He was I rated him so highly. But the biggest quality I thought was how good a man he was. He was always in a good mood. He was always willing to have a laugh. And there was a time that he was serious as well, but he was there for the right reasons. He actually cared about his players. He cared about his staff. And he cared about the game. He wanted the game to progress.
When you look at, I think we all came from, or a lot of people on the call will have come through at some point, the SFA pathway and coaching badges. When you and I were doing that, it was called the Largs Mafia. And Sir Alex would probably be the godfather of that. I think Craig, if he's ever on here, if he ever makes it onto this call, would probably be the Robert Duvall one, and the Godfather 2, the Consigliere. If there was enough women involved in that for him, that would be. How much do you feel that whole process that we went through at Largs, and then latterly it's now at Oriam and St Andrews and all that, how much that process you went through in Largs, do you feel like it's underrated? And a lot of people say, oh, the Largs Mafia, and kind of decry it. But some of the experiences that you had there must have been incredibly important to your formation as a coach.
I think the criticism that particular scenario took, Kingy, was horrendous, because I couldn't disagree with it more. I thought the staff that the SFA provided, the speakers that they provided, were absolutely first class. I mean, they were the last ones to leave the pub sometimes at night, but I'll tell you what, there was never anybody late for the work the next morning, and you would never have known the professionalism, the knowledge. I always thought they were so willing to help the candidates, like they weren't leaving people on an island. This is my opinion of it, of course. I was terrified. I mean, anyone that's ever done a license of any sort of, whether it's a driving license, you're petrified. You know, there's no a point where you're actually enjoying this. You're going, by the way, I'm going to be assessed here. You know, it's when you're being assessed and when you're under that sort of pressure, it's not an enjoyable experience. And when you're around a lot of senior pros that were taking it at the time, and some high-profile people, it can be very intimidating. I'm just Colin Miller, and here are John Brown and so on and so forth, guys that have had very good careers taking their licenses. Big Jordan McCluskey and that played with big clubs as well. But when I look back on it, Kenny, the experience, I'd never turn it down, because it was a time when you were dreading it, but you knew that if you did the right things, that you were going to get your licenses. And I'm sure when I did my A licence, the Scottish licence was rated 4th in Europe. And a lot of that had to do with, I believe, with Andy Roxburgh getting all this stuff and bringing it back to Scotland. So we were getting things firsthand. So, and you look at, and even when I went back, I did a refresher at Murray Park a number of years ago when Alan Shearer was doing his A licence in Scotland. And I was just a runner. I was just a player. Well, I've been called much worse than that, but I was a player that day, or that whole week. And I said to Alan, I says, why are you taking your licence here, Alan? He says, best in the business. He said, I wouldn't go anywhere else. And, you know, when you get someone of that stature coming and speaking so highly about the Scottish licences, I'm a big promoter of it, I must admit, Kingy, but the experiences were fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I remember Alan Moore, that I played with for years at various clubs. What a character he was. And so Dick Campbell was his assessor, and we had played, we were at Dunfermline together at the time, and wee Mooney's going to Dick, says, by the way, my team's hammering that team, Dick, look at the system I've got, look how well we're playing. And Dick turned around and says, you've got fucking 12 players on the park, take one home. But I just thought that the presentations, the way things went, the standards, and, you know, I looked at, with the greatest respect at the time, the Canadian licence was being done when I did my Canadian A licence, Kenny, and I looked at, with the greatest respect, the candidates that were on the licence, and out of the 24 that were there, it's quite strong words here, I would have maybe said 8 of them, maximum 9 of them, would have been A licence candidates. And there was Dale Mitchell, myself, and Stephen Hart, 3 national team coaches there as well.
Oh, thanks.
And I didn't see an A licence candidate from the majority, and yet there were so many people past it. Whereas when you pass your Scottish A licence at that time, you actually had earned that licence in a big way. You'd put in the graft, you'd put in the work, and they were very clear that you were at that level. That was my opinion of Largs.
That kind of helped you on to get to your first managerial job, and as you mentioned there at Aki's.
Yeah.
And I think anybody that knows you well and has seen you on these calls knows that you're a humble guy and that kind of stuff. But when you go into that first job and you finally made it, you're the gaffer. How many mistakes did you make?
You can ask Chappie. He saw me make them, every one of them. It was because Chappie was there. I think I can't remember. I think Chappie was working in the community or something like that. Chappie. I'm not sure exactly what his title was, but he was taking the training the night that I arrived at the club. And 1 week before that, I'd played for Ayr United against Hamilton. And in the following week, I'm the manager at Hamilton. So I was 33 years of age, and I got offered the job, and I bumped into an ex-gaffer of mine in Gatwick Airport in London. And he says, Colin Miller, he says, why the F did you take that Hamilton job? He says, why would you take a job like that? And I says, well, I thought it was going to be the next Walter Smith or Graham Souness or something like that, or words to that effect. And he says, no. And the piece of advice that he gave me at that time, he says, never take a job where there is no light at the end of the tunnel, where there's no chance of getting on. And so he was quite a high profile person, but it was an interesting piece of advice, Kenny, because not everybody gets the chance to be the manager of Man United or Liverpool's or those types of clubs. So when having done the licenses and having done a lot of coaching and working with first team players at a very early age at Hamilton, you kind of think, you're 33, how many more seasons have you got left? Certainly had a few left in the first division with Ayr United, but I just got this opportunity, and it was a club that I felt very close to. It was an opportunity to go back and work with some people some players, and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to have a bash at this. And it was an unbelievable experience, absolutely unbelievable experience, because you've gone from the guy that goes in the morning and his boots are polished for him and his gear's all laid out and everything's all done, to being the guy who's making sure the people that are there polishing the boots, the washing's done, the kits, and all the decisions are being made. And we've probably got a few managers on the line, or head coaches on the line here, thinking, yeah, it's exactly right. The pressure that comes along with it is at times unbearable. You know, we had 2 young kids, Maria and I, and if I had stayed in Scotland, I would have got divorced, because the job had totally consumed me. We were getting relegated. We were struggling. I was invited onto the pro license. I think it was the second pro license through the SFA, and I actually stepped back from it because I had to put so much time. I think it was 275 hours in the pro license. Plus, it cost a fortune. I couldn't afford to do it, and the wages were late, and so on and so forth. I knew I was in trouble, Kingy, when the chief executive came in one day, and he was trying to make a phone call with his fucking TV remote control, and his wife's trying to change the TV with his phone. I knew I was in serious problems at that time. So, but the players were the Monday to Friday part of it was phenomenal. Working with the players on the grass with the guys, and really starting to grow as a coach. But I wasn't ready to be a manager. I should have, when hindsight is 2020, of course, I should have spent a lot more time as an assistant coach or an assistant manager or something like that, to serve an apprenticeship, because I was going there, and eventually I became player manager for a very short period of time. I brought in Ali Dawson as my assistant, and Ali was great. He was very level, very honest, and hard as nails at times when he needed to be. And I'd always got on well with Ali at Rangers. But it was such an eye-opening experience, you know. And I've bumped into a few coaches over the years that say, "Oh, I can't wait to be a manager. I can't wait to be a manager. It's brilliant. It's brilliant." I always say, can you be careful what you wish for, because it's not all happy, shiny faces and Pep Guardiolas and all these sort of things. It's no anything to do with that. That's an entirely different world altogether. Because I was starting to get phone calls at 4 a.m. I was starting to get taxis delivered to the house wanting to take me to the airport, so I would bugger off back to Canada. I was getting pizzas delivered to the house. So there was all sorts of things happening that you think, what am I doing? I'd walk through the door, the front door, and my missus and the 2 kids that they'd be wanting to play with me, and I wouldn't be there. I just wasn't there. I remember a story. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was sitting in the office at or the porter cabin, chappie, and it was the phone goes. Scott Struthers, the Aki's secretary, answers the phone, and he comes through and knocks on the door. He says, "Colin," he says, "Terry Butcher's on the phone." And the Big Butch was the manager of Dundee United at the time. And he says, "Wee man," he says, "what the F are you doing in that office at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon?" He says, "What could you possibly be doing at that time in the afternoon?" I said, "Oh, I'm trying to get everything set up for next week." And he says, "I'll tell you what," I says, "I'm going to put the phone down." And I says, "I'm going to give 5, maybe 10 minutes maximum. And I'm going to phone Scott Struthers back. If you're still in that office, I'm coming down. I'll get your address, and I'm going to come down and punch your lights out. You get yourself home to that family, because that's where you should be." And I thought it was brilliant. I'll never forget that, Kingy, because it really was. And now that I'm 56 on Sunday, not an old guy by any stretch of the imagination, but what I have learned over the years in coaching and management is, if you don't have a balance in your life, you put yourself under incredible amounts of pressure. You need to have the balance in your life.
I think that's invaluable to maybe the younger coaches that are on here. Certainly, like, we've all moved away from home and stuff like that. And even for the likes of Chappie there in Kentucky, who I know lives and breathes it all the time and can't give himself a break from it. You know, that kind of stuff for coaches is golden, Colin. At that time, I mean, probably people don't remember this, but it would be you and Ali who kind of started the youth conveyor belt going there that would eventually churn out the likes of James McCarthy, James MacArthur, people like that are still, you know, helping bankroll that club.
Yeah.
But I think you brought a lot of kids in there, didn't you, at the start to try and kind of get that going?
Well, it's interesting. When I signed with the club as the manager, there was no S forms, there was no youth structure at that time, and there was the community sort of stuff that probably Chappie was doing, but there was no kids in every day at our training sessions. And I said, well, we're a provincial club. We have to try and develop players here. We have to try and get something started. And I remember the scout, the older guy that was there, Jim somebody, I can't remember his last name, but he was terrific. He knew every kid in Scotland. It seemed like you name a name and, oh yeah, I've seen that boy, I've seen that boy. So what we did, we actually advertised, and we said, anyone that's not affiliated with a club, come down to Hamilton Palace, where the indoor, or sorry, the sort of hockey sort of stadium or wee fields are down there. And we ended up having upwards of 40 kids coming down there on a Thursday night, and it was Ali Dawson on one pad and I was on the other pad, and the two of us were taking the training, just trying to get something started, to put something back into the community, to try to help the club bigger picture. Now, in no way, shape or form am I taking any credit for the terrific academy that's in place now, but Ali and I got the bones of getting some guys out and training on a Thursday night, and you could even hear some of the parents going, by the way, that's the manager and that's the assistant manager taking the training. So it was important to us. It was actually important to us. And I remember when I resigned at the club, we'd lost 2-0 at home to Queen of the South. I turned and I got waved down to one of the directors to come down to the track. We played at Firhill, of course, and everybody wanted the chairman dead, Jim Watson. There were banners and all sorts of things. It was just a horrendous time to be at the club. And I said to George, I said, George, I'm done. I said, I've had enough. I said, I'm heading back to Canada. And George says, no, you can't do it. Have a wee think about it. So I drove home, hadn't even told the little general, hadn't told the wife, nothing. And I come home and George had phoned and said, listen, the wee man's resigning. He said, we don't want him to resign. So the board actually didn't accept the resignation until the Friday. So I said, I've made my mind up, I'm leaving, but they wanted me to stay on because they could see that we were trying to put things in place. Now, when you're with a small club, and only because I can see Chappie being another manager that's there, he'll know from his time at the clubs that he's been, it takes a long time. You have to get trust, you have to be in the community, you have to be doing all sorts of things. The amount of fans that were leaving Hamilton to go to Ibrox or Celtic Park every week was horrendous because we were playing good football or whatever, you know, even as a player, Kingy. So it was very, very frustrating, but what an incredible experience it was. But it took a week for them to accept the resignation because they could see what we were doing.
Yeah. When you come back to Canada, I think you came back to, first of all, at Abbotsford Soccer Association. You come back for the first job back here. How difficult is it to come from being a professional coach and working in academies? I think some of us made that journey, certainly Chappie and others on the call made that journey when you're working in a pro academy, whether it be at Motherwell or whatever, and then you come here to North America into a youth environment. How difficult was it for you to kind of recalibrate and try and find a way to get your knowledge across, but maybe distill it down?
Yeah, it was, what a question. It was night and day because you've been dealing with professionals sort of every day, your working life from 17, nearly 18-year professional career. All of a sudden you were in amongst boys and girls that I hadn't coached girls in my life up until I'm here now. I love it now. I'm actually the head coach of an all-female club here now. And I've worked with the women's national team under John Herdman and coached at the university level, the women's side of the game. So it's something now I really enjoy. I treat players the same anyway, but I really, really enjoyed it. But when I was there, when I first came back to Abbotsford, I went, oh my God. The players, they couldn't pass the ball from 5 yards away. So it actually made me a better coach, Kenny, because what I had to do now, I had to start to break the game down even more and go back to the very, very basics so that the players, boys and girls, could start to feel better about themselves and how they were actually playing the game. So I'm doing that stage now again, because I had 5 years at FC Edmonton as a manager. Now I'm working with all females, and it's actually making me back to the grassroots level again, and making me a better coach, more patient, just step back. Whereas with the pros or something, you dive in now and again to correct it. Now you just have to be that wee bit more patient. But it was a fantastic experience. We produced, over the 7 years that I was there, we went to number 2 in Canada. I think Oakville was number 1 and Abbotsford was number 2, and that came from one of the CSA's representatives that interviewed us. We had national team players, Sophie Schmidt, Adam Lang, Brad Batum at the youth levels, Spencer Schmidt as well. We had guys and girls that had gone to very, very good levels, fantastic careers down the States with colleges and universities. So it was a successful program. Now, you don't always judge success by winning trophies and so on and so forth. Player retention, of course, is massive. If you've got 16 players on your team from last year and you get 16 players wanting to come back next year for your team at the youth level, that is success. That is success. But what I did in Abbotsford, I managed to take the best players and bring them onto another level, and that's what helped us become number 2 in the country.
What attributes do you think? There's a lot of guys on the call, Colin, who obviously are coaching in the women's side of the game. You said you'd never coached them until you came back to Canada. What do you need to change? What do you need to change in how you deliver things and how you manage the players?
What I learned right away, Kenny, was I couldn't use the tone of voice that I was working with the men's senior professionals with any of the kids for that matter. So I was like a lot of young coaches. We can become Mr. and Mrs. Angry and, it's all about winning. So I've got to be the best coach in the world. You go through that phase where, it's all about me, it's all about me. I think when you're working with the females now, what I find myself doing is really trying to get the players' trust. If you get those players' trust, you will make them better for sure, because the players will buy into it. They'll see that you're there for the right reasons, not just for a paycheck. You're there for the right reasons. You want to make them better. I remember when I left the university job to take the assistant job at the Vancouver Whitecaps, I was in tears when I left the women's university job, because they were my players. They were our players. It's only my team if you get beat, but they were our players, and we'd made it a really, really good place to come to train. And I think once you get that sort of environment where the players are happy to come and work with this coach, you're turning players away at this point. But getting the trust, getting the respect, treating them with respect, and not making special allowances. You have to treat them. You want them to get better. So being firm, but being honest, but being approachable and having a sense of humour. I think if you don't have a sense of humour, you're hooked. If you're just stone-faced and no personality, I see that a lot with a lot of the young coaches that have come through. No personality, even with referees, no personality, straight face. Whereas in our day, it was, you could have a laugh with a referee or something like that. I'd like to see a wee bit more, let your guard down a wee bit now and again, just to show a wee bit more of your own character.
If you were to mentor a young coach, would that be one of the main things you would say to some of the younger coaches on the call that think beyond the X's and O's and start looking at the people you're coaching rather than just the process?
Yeah, because I think, I remember Sam Allardyce saying many, many years ago that when he went into management, 75% of the job was knowledge of the game, 25% of it was man management. I'd say, and then he says now the goalposts have moved totally the opposite direction. Now you still have to know the game. And I think that the fact that you're treating the players well, your knowledge of the game will come out. The game finds you out, doesn't it? The game finds you out. If you don't know what you're doing, players aren't stupid. They'll suss that out right away. But if you've got a bit of a personality where you can see, the players can see that you genuinely care about what you're doing, you've won a watch, because then your football side of things will come out and they'll buy in. But if you're an absolute pain in the backside and you're bullying them every single day, it doesn't matter how good a coach you are. The players nowadays will switch off to that, male or female.
Conscious of time, but I wanted to jump to a couple of times, Colin, because I know Eric might want to throw it back to some questions for the guys that are on the call. you get to build your, and I know from working at Canada Soccer and licenses myself what a reputation you've got in this country. How good was it to get to the kind of level where you end up being national team manager, I think, for what, 10 games and stuff like that? As you say, something that if you'd stayed in Scotland would have been a pipe dream. But here, because of the opportunities that are left open to you, you get to build yourself up, build your reputation, and you get to the point where you can take charge of the national team.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I was the assistant manager with the men's national team with Holger Osiek, and Holger had won the World Cup with Germany. He was the assistant manager with Franz Beckenbauer, and Holger had invited me to come into a couple of camps, and then 2.5 years later, I was embedded in that group with Paul Stalteri and DeVos and all these types of players. So that was a fantastic experience. And when Holger was fired at the national team, Andy Sharp, who was a Scottish Canadian national team president, he asked me if I would stay on and take the next 3 games that were coming up. 3 easy ones. Finland were 32 in the world. Czech Republic were number 4 in the world, and the Republic of Ireland were number 10 in the world, all away from home. And these were teams that Sami Hyypiä was at Finland. You had the Czech Republic was Kohler and the lad that played with Juventus, all these lads. And then Republic of Ireland was just who's who. Damien Duff scored a goal that he'll never forget that night against us. But again, tremendous experience. And I just think that I always treated people with respect. I always do treat people with respect, Kingy, and I was very humble. I listened, I watched, I observed, I had an opinion. If somebody asked me my opinion, I will tell. This nose is natural. It's not from telling lies. I can tell you it's this size because I was born with it. But I respected the game. I used to hate players that would come in and moan about training or it's raining or something like that. I said, well, there's people out there digging a ditch for a living or doing whatever they're doing. You're in this profession. You're playing and involved in a sport. So I always showed the game respect, and I think that's one of the factors that has helped me get through there. When people phone Colin Miller, they know that they're going to get a bit of a laugh, but there's another side of me that is business, that is work, and there's a time and place for that. And I think a combination of that, plus probably being in the right place at the right time, Kingy, there's also a wee bit of luck involved in the game. But once you've done it once or twice, to get 10 games out of it's no luck. It's the people that with the association trusted me that I would do a good job. And I also took the national team to the Gold Cup one year. I was as the interim guy. I got the team 4 days before the tournament started, which didn't help. But we lost to Martinique. The last kick of the ball, couldn't believe it. Will never forget it in my life. We played very, very well against a good Mexico side down in Seattle and lost 2-0. And then we drew against Panama. But the players gave me a standing ovation. We had 9 unattached players at the time in the tournament. And the only first team football that they were playing was playing for Canada. And there's something wrong with that picture for sure. Thankfully now our programs are progressing and lots of development going on.
Different. I think the fact that Canada's got a poster child now in Davies is going to help because obviously you mentioned there, you referenced when you went to the 86 World Cup, that's the last time Canada qualified. Yeah. It's nice to be in a country that's even worse than Scotland, isn't it?
Scotland bragging rights there for sure.
The thing we've got to finish, we always try and finish these with a laugh, and I think all of us enjoyed, apart from the fact that he had Osama bin Laden's Wi-Fi when we had him on, Craig Brown. I think if we look back to your time at Derby with him, there's got to be a few stories. I know Eric wants you to tell one, but we can't tell that one. But but there's got to be a few stories of your time with Billy Davies and Brown and all that, even football stuff as well. I mean, everybody. I think Billy Davies. I remember going to do a piece when he was at Preston, and people say managers or coaches breathe football. Billy Davies was unbelievable. He had I don't know if you ever saw it, he had an editing suite in his house for doing the match analysis. He actually spent around £5,000 of his own money to put an editing suite in the house, and he was clipping them, and it was way before people were. And I just remember thinking, wow, this guy's like, different level. For me as a journalist and a coach at the time, was just fascinating. So working with him in particular, and then obviously living with Brun, I mean, that's a book in itself, is it not?
I can tell you everything you think that took place took place, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that. But Billy Davis for me was the best that I've ever seen on the grass.
Yeah.
The best I haven't seen anybody come close to him. His knowledge, what he saw in the game, it bamboozles me that he's knowing the game at the moment. I don't know where Billy is. Now and again, I get a wee message from him on LinkedIn or something like that. But when I stayed with Craig, it was every day was an adventure. He'd get up in the morning, right? What are we doing today, boys? What are we doing today? You know, and it was just, that was his attitude every single day of his life. He'd come in and he was in the same mood, always approachable, a wonderful man. I remember he would go for dinner because I stayed with him for 5.5 months when I was at Derby, and it was like living with the headmaster. And his knowledge, you could just imagine every conversation. And he was like a wee bit like Ian Munro. He'd get the coins out and start moving bits and pieces. Anytime he sat with Ian Munro, it was just that he had a full pocket of change. I think that's why he walked like that at times, because he had a full pocket of change and he couldn't wait to get the coins out and move them all about. But Craig was like that, and what bamboozled me was his memory for the game. He must have had a photographic memory, because I couldn't tell you what I did at 7 o'clock this morning. Never mind what I did 10 years ago and so on. But Craig's memory was brilliant, other than when he was driving. The amount of time. So our club cars were Lexus when we were at Derby, and the amount of times we come out of the car and it was a push button start, push button start. So you actually didn't have to take the key out. So I can give him some allowance. I said, so we'd walk away. I said, Brun, I said, what's wrong with this picture? He says, what are you talking about? I says, is there any chance you go and turn your car off? So I must have done that 3 or 4 times. Just kept forgetting about it. The car was so quiet, you just turned it off, but you had to take your keys. But going to the likes of France to go to watch Marseille and Metz, you know, Craig, Billy had sent us to go and watch a couple of front players for Marseille. We had no chance of getting the players, of course, but the respect that Craig got, even in France, was amazing. A real character. He had director of football operations, or he had a real big fancy title, a big fancy desk, but it was his passion, his knowledge for the game was. I never had a bad word to say about anybody. He was such a good person that I look back, and even I'm not sure if Eric was in the trip or was there when I had asked Craig to come down and tell my FC Edmonton players the stories about his background with Scotland and stuff like that. And he gave up a full night to do that. It was amazing. And then I worked with Coca-Cola for 5 weeks before I came back to Abbotsford with Big Jim Duddy, as I was speaking to before we come on. And I asked Craig if he would come and turn the Christmas lights on at the hospital in Glasgow. And he was driving like a nutcase as usual from Edinburgh. He was doing something else, come through and managed to turn the lights on at Christmas for the kids and all that. So that sums up Craig Brown to me, that not only a fantastic ambassador for Scotland in the game, but very complimentary to a lot of good things that are happening, and not overly critical, just a genuinely knowledgeable, good guy. And I've been privileged to know him for a long time.
And Kingy, just to add to the Craig Brown statement, Craig was going to join us today, and sadly, he actually had an emergency surgery about a week or so ago. It was pretty serious surgery, and he had all intentions of joining us today. He thinks so highly in the world of Colin that he was trying to set some time aside today to join us. But he sent me a message yesterday. He just couldn't quite make it. He's still on his road to recovery, but certainly I know our thoughts and prayers are with him. And again, he sends his best wishes to you, Colin, and it was certainly, he thinks super highly of you and your time together.
Yeah, brilliant.
Colin, I think I was just in the point there of just maybe throwing it back to Eric to see if he wanted to wrap it up with any questions.
I think what I'd like to finish up with, and thanks so much, King, that was brilliant. And what I'd like to flip it over to is Chappie's known Colin for a long, long time. And without kind of putting Chappie on this spot, Chappie, I want to ask you the question. Why do we all think the world of Colin? I've known Colin a long time, but give us your, your insight to Colin, and, the impact that he's had on people, and you've watched his journey pretty closely. Can you give us your tuppence worth on Colin and his journey?
I think everybody here can hear, just you can sense the passion, the obsession they've got, and it's something. I think Colin will take you back to Willie McLean, and who my mentor, and I worked many years now with, and the influences people had. But you can just feel the passion and obsession Colin's got, and that rubs off anybody comes across. And I was at Hamilton when Colin came in, and I think I'd agreed to come to America actually, so I was getting out and he was coming in. Maybe I seen the problems, Colin. And I think the respect and humility he's got, that personality, and I liked the way he was talking about young coaches coming up now. It's a lot of theory. They're not seeing a lot on the park anymore. It's all about the books and the studying, and we tend to lose ourselves with the flavour of the month. I think I said in my last presentation about why we coach and what influences. I think Colin hit it in the nail there, is you've got to be yourself. And that is certainly a gentleman who is definitely self, but he's had good influences, good mentors like myself. And I'm quite sure Colin, as people say, if we cut you open, footballs will fall out, never mind the blood. Albeit the colour of blood's always debatable there.
I think it'd be red, white, and blue footballs, though.
It might be. And also as well, as a Motherwell fan, as a young kid, I was an Airdrie fan, but they just classed us as Rangers fans without bus fare. That was the thing. So, but I think the passion and all that, Colin, and I just took a couple of wee notes here about roughly the same age, street football, and how we grew up, and just the passion, obsession we have. How is there anything you think we can maybe do, not just here, but even back home as well? Is how do we install that passion and obsession into the young kids of the day? Because we can try and, you're respectful, you're humble, you're trying to be politically correct at times, of which you knew our mentor Willie was sometimes, I think you get the good side of him. I worked with him every day, and I tell you, wasn't he always good? But how can we get that passion, obsession that you certainly have in abundance, and how can we maybe try and install that into the players of tomorrow, and maybe sometimes the coaches of tomorrow?
Yeah, it's North America, Chappie, as you'll know, is a different culture to most places in the world, to be honest with you. We live and breathe football. Whereas, and I actually saw it at the professional level with the teams that I've worked with in Canada, where, they've just finished a training session, they can't wait to see what their basketball team, their favourite basketball team, the score is there, or their favourite hockey team is there. Whereas back in the UK, nobody gives a toss about the NHL or the NBA or so on and so forth. Everything is about the game itself. And what some of the things that I try to do at training with our coaches, with our teams, I actually say to the coaches, just put the goals down and let the kids figure it out themselves. And that could be even up at the U18 levels, that there's a ball in the middle. Okay, tonight we're just going to put one condition on the game. As soon as your team loses the ball, get goal side, whatever it is. It could be something as simple as that, and then they have to figure it out themselves. And I do that quite often, Chappie, where I try to give the kids back the game. Where, I've said to a number of the coaches at the club that I'm at the moment, are you getting paid by the word? Because you're doing a running commentary here. It's just non-stop. I do the colour commentary for the Vancouver Whitecaps for TSN Radio, only because I've got the teeth and bone structure for it. It's horrendous listening to these coaches. And I say to them, if you don't know what you're doing, just let the kids play. Give them a chance to play and enjoy the game. And I sometimes think, and we've actually asked some of the more esteemed guests on the do you think there's too much coaching goes into things at the moment? Because we just put the jackets down the way we just played. And I don't see that nearly as much as what it should be. Now and again, I say to the coach, there's nothing wrong with having a game for 45 minutes tonight. Nothing wrong. Just letting the kids play, let them figure it out. There's nothing wrong with that. You might not be able to do that every week. You wanted to instill one or two wee bits in. But give the kids back the chance to play, for goodness sake.
It's that hunger, and we call it the words obsession all that just now, but coming across a lot of coaches as well is the, and getting back to your influence and your mentors we spoke about, and some of the names we all threw large at the time, and I agree 100%. the large mafia only came about with people who didn't have a good experience.
Yeah.
That was it. Whether it was they got a wee cross against their license, whatever.
Yeah.
But you look at these kind of influences, but a lot of coaches of today, they look at the Klopp, they look at Guardiola, they look at all these books and theories. They don't take that. They lose a lot of themselves because they're trying to replicate it and all think they're like that. And I think you made a very good point about that personality of your coach. But being brought up the way you were, that's obviously a big influence in you and your coaching and everything else you're doing. And if we can pass that into some coaches, I don't know, maybe are you involved in the coach education? Because I think the knowledge you have, the passion, obsession, you could certainly play a massive, massive role in any association to help develop coaches in the future.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with our coaches within the club. And, you know, what's strange, anybody that's ever done that sort of role within a youth club, it's not an easy role because you're dealing with other people's egos. You're dealing with men and women that are have played at the local level. They've maybe been the best player locally or something like that, and they don't need to be told. They know everything. You know, I was working with one of the coaches. I said, "I'll come in and help your back four out with the recess." "Oh yeah, I was a defender all my life." So they lose 5-1 in the weekend, and I'm actually going like that. Great, brilliant. Maybe I can help you next week now. You know, and there's just little things like that make the job a wee bit more frustrating because no, everybody, Chappie, but the vast majority want to buy in and they want the help. You know, just little bits. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the final part I'd written down here in the wee. Sorry, I'd sent a whole load of nonsense to the guys, and I said I don't complicate things now. I don't complicate things, anything in my life now. I don't do it. I don't need to compete with Joe Smith down the street with his team or his club. That I don't need to do that anymore. It's inside me to compete. We'll not lose that. But I want people around about me to be better. And I just think that I had a great line the other day. Everybody's been Guardiola. Let's make it as difficult as it can possibly be. And it's actually a simple game. It's a simple game. It doesn't need some of the terminology now is. If I can quickly tell this story, I was with John Herdman with the women's national team a number of years ago, and we went to the Cyprus Cup, and we drew Scotland, Holland, and Italy. I think were the three countries that were in Canada's group. So I hadn't met John before. I'd heard that he's a workaholic. If you thought Billy Davies worked hard, John Herdman would give Billy a race here for sure. The most organised. Any games that John's preparing for his team, men or women's team, you actually think you're going to war. His house, his basement, his room, like a war zone. It's everything that you could possibly imagine up on the walls. So I arrived, and there was a gentleman by the name of Rob Sherman. Rob Sherman was the TD of Australia and a phenomenal. He was a pro licensed instructor. What a football brain this man had. John's an A licensed instructor as well. So as you can imagine, quite intimidating for the wee man to arrive here in Cyprus. So I didn't know any of the staff other than the lady that was the kit woman. So I go in and we're sitting down, we're having our first meeting. The players arrive the next day and we're sitting around, and John's one of these techies. I'm not kidding, this PowerPoint presentation was like a Star Wars film. There was things exploding, there was things moving. I'm going, this is better than going to the pictures watching this. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then all of a sudden this terminology started to go on. I said, don't know that. And I'm starting to think, holy shit, what am I doing here? So John says to me, he says, "Wee man," he says, you've been quiet. What are you thinking? I says, "John, are we still talking about football?" And everybody started laughing at the table. And I thought, oh, thank God. And I says, "What does that mean? What does that mean? What is it?" And it was all simple things like an overlap, whatever it was well, that's an overlap. Forget the terms that you use, or through the curtains was an example. I think, what does through the curtains mean? Not that. So I had to learn the lingo again, and I'm thinking, well, I haven't a clue what the hell they're talking about. And then, so I get the chance. So I had to prepare the team to play against Holland. So Rob has got Italy, John has got Scotland. Well, that's how we're set up. So they do their two presentations, and you can imagine it's PowerPoints going all over the place and things like that. And I'm going, oh, geez, oh. So I pulled John and Rob across, and I says, "Listen, guys, sorry, I can't do this." "What do you mean you can't do this?" I says, "Well, you've got a Star Wars film going on there. You've got all this presentation, all that stuff. I don't know how to do all of that." He says, well, how do you do it? I said, a fucking pen and a piece of paper and flip chart. I said, well, just do it that way. He said, you sure? He says, aye, no problem at all. So I got in. So you got Christine Sinclair, Sophie Schmidt, and all the girls all there in front of us. And I thought, and I stood up in front of them and says, girls, this is a pen and this is a piece of paper. I says, we're going back to the dark ages here now. I says, but I'm going to teach you about Holland. And so I went through the whole rigmarole. So my information was spot on. It was just a different way of doing it from what the other guys did. It was a flip chart. Oh, what's the number 10? She's quick. All that sort of stuff. And when I finished, and I told a couple of stories, as you can imagine, in between the team talk, the girls got up and stood. They were laughing, giving me a standing ovation. Fantastic. So they all leave, and John and Rob, they come across and they say, wee man, never ever change what you're doing, because your knowledge is there, you're organised, your information, everything was 100% correct. We can't do what you're doing. We can't do that because John was hadn't had a playing career. Not that you have to be a professional football player to be a coach or a manager. And Rob didn't have a long, distinguished career either. He says, you're in those players' heads because you had been a national team player, blah, 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 all that stuff. And we can't do that. He says, so never ever change who you are. So what you're saying there, chap, is right, that you be yourself, because eventually if you know yourself, you'll get found out. And you'd much rather do it your way than, oh, he told me to do this, and that must be it. Oh, she told me to do it that way. No, you have to have your own views on the game. Very, very important.
Well, Colin, brilliant. I'm sure, Eric, we all can listen to you all day. Brilliant, love it. And again, you say you're too small, too slow and too fat. I'm the same. And the reason for that, Colin, is because we were the recipient of the chocolate biscuits every day because we weren't the worst player at training. So brilliant to hear from you, Colin. All the best, pal. We'll catch up soon. Thanks, Eric.
That was brilliant. Thanks, Chappie. Well, just to wrap us up there, guys, I know we could sit here for hours here on end, but Colin, that was absolutely fantastic. Chappie, thanks for jumping in there, without any prep. And any further questions, Andy's got, just to finish us off here? Yeah.
I just got a quick comment to say, hey, Colin, I remember that meeting. I was right there in front row, buddy.
Chelsea, can you put yourself on video? Because you kind of came out of social media at the last minute, and I'm like, I know Chelsea's got a story to tell. Chelsea, can you give us a little
goodness,
your experience with Mr. Miller here?
Oh, let's just say he put the hammer on the nail with that story, because I'll tell you right now, we were all like blown away with how John had all of his technology and all of his stuff going on, and we were like, whoa, this guy's up to date. And then Colin pulls out a pen and paper. I swear to God, we laughed for like 10 minutes. We were like, I love this, because for me, the way I learn, like, I'm super old school that way as well. Like, even right now with my coaching full time with all my teams, like, I am somebody that has a pen and paper all day, every day. I don't do it's hard when you go through the US soccer licensings and all that stuff with the digital learning center. I am super old school with all my sessions. I like to write things out. I like to, draw, make sense of everything. So when he pulled it out, we laughed, and I was like, it's okay. I'll definitely get what he's saying, because that's how I learn. So it was
Brilliant.
great. It was great.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Chelsea. Any other questions from anybody, guys? I think we're finished up there. Colin, thanks so much for your time, mate. That was absolutely brilliant. I know we maybe helped you go over that hangover for last night, but that was fascinating. What a journey. And delivered in only a way that you could deliver it, Colin. It's a pleasure, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah.
Kingy, thanks again, mate.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Colin.
Good weekend, everybody.
Cheers.
All the